interested in hearing it, I have a story that I'd like to tell you. It's about a man called the Mender, and I've never been able to get it out of my head. But the story starts when I arrive in this little village, and I bring very few things with me. I'm stationed here for 6 months, and there's fuck all to do in the village. But that's not too bad for me. I don't need that much in life. The most important things to me are my cloak, which tells everybody that I'm an engineer of the Imperial Survey Corps, my titanium spoon, which makes pretty much everything taste good, and my watch. But you know, my watch broke the instant I stepped into this village. I don't know why. But the instant I stepped into this village, my watch broke, and I went to the nearest person, who happened to be a grimy looking little kid, and just said, "Hey, do you know where I can get this fixed? Is it possible for me to get this fixed?" Kid makes his face at me, like, "You could go to the Mender. It's just right up that path." And look, it was getting dark by this point, but it didn't matter. I really needed my watch to work. And I know I'd only been here for a couple of minutes, so, if this guy could fix my watch within an hour, I can fix it. I can still have some rough sense of the time. And so I took the path, and I get to the Mender's house, and it's the strangest thing I've ever seen. It was this massive igloo made of stones and filled with moss and things between the cracks of the stones. It looked ancient. It looked like cavemen lived there. But whatever. This guy could fix my watch, so what do I care? And I walk in, and I see there's cages on the walls full of birds, and they're all squawking. There are all kinds of birds. There's coals and crows and pigeons and doves and parrots, and they're all broken in some way. They all have wings that are clipped, or beaks that are chopped off, or legs that are missing and replaced with little sticks. It was horrifying, actually. And the Mender didn't say a word. Just looked at me and seemed to know what was broken. Just went right up to my hand and took a look at my watch, took it off my wrist, turned around, and then turned back around, and my watch was working again. And the time had shifted too. It was just whatever time it was at that point. So the next day, I tried to digest what I saw, but I can't make head or tails of it. It's a very strange thing to see somebody who isn't educated be able to fix a watch so quickly. So I walked away, and I had to go do some surveying. That was my job, after all. That's what I'd been stationed to do. And you spend your whole day looking through that scope, and you try to measure this and measure that. And it can get pretty dull. And I just remember noticing all around me how there were no birds. I came across a bird that had been struck by something, I don't know, a cat or whatever, but it was a large bird, and it looked to be in distress. And I remember looking down at it and feeling pity for it. And I'd never been one to care much about animals, but it reminded me of the scene back at the Mender's house. And so I picked it up, and I went to the Mender. And the Mender looked at me, and again said nothing, and gestured to go inside the house. And this is when things got strange. While I was outside, I could hear the squawk of the birds, the happy squawk of the birds inside. And then once I went in, they quieted down. The Mender looked at the bird in front of me and asked me to lay it down on the table. And I did. And he took one look and asked me to turn around. I did. And then he tapped on the table a couple of times, and then he tapped on my shoulder, and I turned around to see the bird seemed fine again. And he gestured to me that I needed to take it out of here. And I picked up the bird, and I walked away. And as soon as I left the house, the birds in there started making noise again. I sort of opened up my arms and let the bird run away. And it ran and it ran and flew away beautifully. And I realized then it was a massive bird. It was a hawk. It was majestic. I went to sleep, and the next day I had to go survey a different area a little further up. And when I get there, I look through my scope, I make my measurements. As I break for midday lunch, I hear the anguished cries of another bird. And I go to see what it is, and it's the same hawk from yesterday, injured in exactly the same way that I'd seen before. I thought the mender had fixed this. I looked down at my watch, and my watch was broken too. I didn't understand. How could this happen? So I picked up the hawk and the watch, and I took it back to the mender. And I didn't have to gesture this time. The mender knew exactly what was happening. And he didn't even bother asking me to turn around this time. He merely tapped on my watch, and it started ticking again, the right time. He tapped on the bird, and its wings seemed to have healed properly. And this time, he took the bird from me, and he put it in a cage. After he put the bird in the cage, I turned around, and I saw that same small child who led me to the mender at first, but he was holding the hand of a much older man. And the older man said, "Mender, I need you to fix me." And the mender had this grave look on his face, almost asking, "Do you know what you're asking of me? Do you know what you're signing up for?" And the old man says, I know I won't be able to leave this village ever again, but I can't go now, not yet. And the mender approached him very quietly and put his hand just onto his chest. The old man breathed a sigh of relief and walked away. The child turned around and made that same face at me. I turned to the mender this time and said, "You know, I was surprised that somebody of your skill existed, but now I see it isn't really skill, it's some kind of magic, isn't it? And it's a kind of magic that comes with a pretty deep cost. Whoever is repaired by you, whatever is repaired by you, breaks once it's far away." And the mender kind of deeply nodded. And as I continued talking to the mender, the hawk had slipped loose from its cage and had made its way over to one of the other cages. Quiet. I hadn't even noticed until I heard the squawk of a parrot. The mender turned around and began to wail, a horrible wail. These things he had fixed, they were important to him. They couldn't leave him. He put a piece of themselves into them. And as he wailed, I looked down at my watch and I saw that it had broken too. And slowly, all the birds in the house began to fall apart. Their wings fell off, their beaks fell off. And I started to hear even the old man who had just left, his weak moan. And the mender began to wail, and he began to hit the hawk, trying to get it to let go of the parrot. But it was too late. The hawk was triumphant. So quickly it had been able to reach in between the thin space between the bars on the parrot's cage, and it had torn it apart. And the man, the mender, gestured me outside. He picked up a tub of oil. He started spraying it around. I didn't want to stick around, so I left. And the man kept sloshing the oil around. And I don't think I heard it, but I could imagine it, the strike of the match, and then the drop of the match onto the floor. I walked away that day. I walked 30 kilometers to the nearest village that had another train station, and got back on that train, and I went back to the capital. I gave my watch to some street urchin, had them repair it for me, and I never looked back.